Welcome to Clocking In by PilieroMazza. I'm Nicole Atala, and this is my partner,
Sarah Nash. Hi, everyone.
And we're here to talk to you about labor and employment news for government contractors. Today, we wanted to talk to you about DEI and the impending deadline by the Trump administration to ensure that you do not have any illegal DEI programs. This has been a little bit of a roller coaster since late January when this executive order was issued. And there's a lot of confusion out there about what illegal DEI means, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And there have been so many executive orders during this administration that I think a lot of these EOs are getting kind of commingled a little bit, particularly the no illegal DEI and the gender identity, sexual orientation stuff gets a little bit commingled. There's just a lot out there and a lot of misinformation about what we have to do by April 21st. So, Sarah, what did the EO really tell us we had to do back in January?
That's another point of confusion, but the deadline actually applies to AAPs. So we've sort of made the assumption that in targeting APs, the administration is also giving a deadline to these other illegal DEI practices, but it's kind of a mix out there. We're seeing certifications issued before the April 21st deadline, which is, 90 days after the initial EO was issued. But the one thing we do know is that any AAPs for women and minorities should be discontinued no later than April 21st.
Right. And so just to be clear, you are not supposed to maintain illegal DEI programs, that kind of arguably is in existence now, right? We're seeing contracting officers come out and say, do you have any of these things? But in the same EO, the Trump administration says, but we're going to give you a pass on maintaining your AAPs because we're not completely yanking Executive Order 11246, which is where these AAPs for women and minority come from, right? So we're going to give you some time to yank those back. And that's really the April focus. Do I have that right?
Yep. I think it's sort of a hat tip to the idea that these were required previously. If for those who might not be familiar, if you have under 50 employees, once you hit 50 employees, there were these obligations that you submit these AAPs. Very recently, only a couple of years ago, right, OFCCP required that you upload them to their website every summer. And so I think what they were kind of acknowledging is that this was a requirement. It's no longer a requirement, so we're going to give people some time to catch up to the new system.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is important to note is that you still do need to maintain your AAPs on veterans and those with disabilities. Those things have not been affected by the revocation of EO 11246, right? So those are still there, and you still have to maintain all of the requirements incidental to those regulations, which include subcontract clauses and some recruiting requirements and the like. So just make sure that we're still focused on compliance with those particular issues. And then it's a good idea, like Sarah, what have you been telling clients to do with respect to reviewing and evaluating whether or not they have these illegal DEI programs?
So again, it's not all DEI, right? It's just illegal DEI. And what the administration has clarified through, I think, OPM issued a memo that kind of defines a little bit what they're talking about. And basically what that memo affirms is that it's any hiring practices or promotion practices that provide employees with a preference based on their sex or their race or their nationality. And just to be clear, these are things that you should not have been doing already in the scheme of Title VII, in the scheme of anti-discrimination laws. It has always been unlawful to provide preferences based on individuals' sex or race. So there's nothing new there. But to the extent that you have anything that looks like a preference, some companies, for example, identify on their websites, I'm not going to say a quota, but goals that they've been trying to attain in terms of women hires or minority hires. Those are practices that I would say get rid of those. The new administration is not going to take kindly to them.
Yeah, we also know, or at least have heard, that what's left of the OFCCP, which is not much, right? But that what's left of the OFCCP They might be reviewing AAPs that were filed in the past for evidence that contractors do have illegal DEI programs. So, it's not a bad idea to go through your past AAPs and document that they've been discontinued. And to the extent you're concerned about specific goals or things that you've put or identified in those AAPs as practices that you're going to put in place that might be problematic, at least from a perception basis, you might want to document what's been discontinued, you're no longer doing, et cetera, just to make clear that you don't have any of those programs in place. So that might not be a bad idea either. Check your subcontracts for your subcontract language relating to 11246 and make sure you switch it over to just the VEVRA and Section 503 language. Make sure you're taking a very close look at certification language provided by contracting officers. It's not standard. We're seeing certain themes, right? And certain language we're seeing repeated over and over and over again, but it's not all the same. And we've had some contract modifications that kind of go beyond the scope of the executive order, and we've had to push back a little bit. Sarah, what is one of your primary pieces of advice for contractors going forward with respect to the certification?
One quick other point, since we're talking about certifications, is that the reps and certs in SAM.gov have not been updated yet, so they're still appearing. So we've gotten a lot of questions from folks saying, what am I supposed to do here? It says you have to certify that you're compliant with the, AAP obligations, but we're not supposed to be. Agencies, GSA, others have issued guidance that basically says, don't worry, agencies are supposed to ignore those responses. And so to the extent that people are sort of grappling with the rocky terrain as we make this transition, there's been a little bit of clarity offered. But when it comes to the certifications, I'd say my number one piece of advice has been, because we've gotten a lot of clients saying, great, should I get rid of my anti-harassment policy? Should I get rid of my EEO policies? No. These are even more important than ever because of the certification and because of the potential for FCA liability. It's really important that you have clear guidelines on non-discrimination, that you are compliant with Title VII, the ADA, other federal laws that prohibit discrimination. All that stuff is that much more important because now you're potentially walking into an FCA violation for not being accurate with your certification. So that's my number one point. What about you, Nicole? What have you been telling folks?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think my number one concern is the False Claims Act, right? Because all of the draft certification language we've seen is you certify as basically in exchange for these federal funds, you're not going to have any of these illegal DEI programs or anything that violates a federal anti-discrimination law. So that means that anytime you go out and you engage in the reasonable accommodation process, a plaintiff's attorney not only has the remedy of going to the EEOC, but they also have a False Claims Act allegation against you. So that really ups the stakes. And you'll hear a lot of talk with AAP vendors and lawyers that say you really need this EEO compliance evaluation. And that's just a really fancy word for saying check under the hood and make sure you've got really good practices in place. It's not just about your anti-discrimination and harassment policy in your handbook, but are you still training your managers how to handle these things? I was on an EEOC investigation call yesterday, and she was really hammering whether or not this manager knew what the policy said and who to report to, and the last time he'd been trained, right? And those are not legal requirements, but they're certainly going to help you if your managers know how to handle reference to a disability, how to take complaints seriously, what to do. Those are all going to be very helpful for an organization going forward. Any last pieces of advice, Sarah, on this DEI issue before we close?
The only thing I would add is there's been a lot of back and forth in the courts. There were preliminary injunctions issued. There were preliminary injunctions stricken. We're still in the middle of a lot of active court cases trying to evaluate where things are. And so I would just say this is a world where we've seen it changing on sort of a daily basis. So it's just important to stay up to date on the news to make sure that you're familiar with the most recent requirements and guidance out there.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and stay tuned. Things are moving and changing very quickly, and we will do our best to put out client alerts update our blog postings, watch out for some really great multi-state, multi-jurisdictional webinars, and of course, tune in to Clocking In whenever you get a chance. Have a great day.